Chuen, Yaniru, Gayonsi, Ragawane, Staguia, Jufarufa, Ogisi de Uchire. Again, my name is Lavelle Eagle Elk, Ragawane, Staguia, Jufarufa, Ogisi de Uchire. Bear Clan, appointed as chief by elders, our clan mothers, tribal council. Don't take the position lightly. Anytime you're in some type of position like this, it's a huge responsibility. Actually, in a position like this, you're pretty much a servant. You're at the service, and you are conducting yourself as a servant. Three at one time. Let's give it a try. So, I wanted to make a real quick point about the state of affairs with our tribes on the East Coast, Eastern Woodlands. I'm gonna make it really, really quick. There's a issue with racism among tribal people at each other. It's really ridiculous. It's really stupid. But I see it. It's up and down the East Coast. I can understand when people need to seek federal or state recognition because of the damage that's been done to Native communities. You see that as a way to secure educational scholarships, get your kids in good colleges, to raise money for communities, to help create jobs, to help with healthcare and all these different things. So I don't knock it if that's what you're doing, if you're trying to get the recognition for that. What I have an issue with is when you use that recognition to belittle and downplay other people who has the same ancestry as you, but opted out of the recognition process. Keep in mind, recognition is a nice way of saying civilized. Civilized is a nice way of saying assimilated. Everybody didn't choose assimilation. So if that's your choice, we're not knocking it. We understand the dynamics and what has been done to us here. But don't knock us for those of us who are not going that route. Come as well. What I've noticed about a lot of tribes up the East Coast, starting in Virginia and going northward, they've embraced the diversity. I see tribes in Virginia, Maryland, Delaware, New York, Rhode Island, just East Coast, but starting from Virginia up. I've seen a lot of diversity, and they've embraced it. You go to the Shinnecock powwows, and you see it in there. You go to the Nottaways, you see it. You look at the Delawares, the Lenape, you look at the Narragansett and the Wampanoag, you look at the Poconoke and all these tribes of the East Coast, you see they've embraced their diversity. They have brown people from different spectrums. They have copper. They have some people who you would say fit the look of a native. And then they have some people who they say fit the look of an African American. Do you know who started all these classifications that so many of you embrace? When I say you, I'm talking about native people. A lot of you embrace this crap, especially in the Carolinas southward, and Tennessee, and Alabama, and Texas. A lot of you embrace this stuff, but you know who started it? We didn't. The indigenous people didn't start it. Whatever Africans that was brought here, they didn't start it. whatever Africans that was brought to this land, along with the indigenous people that was here, they had so much in common because they looked at the land as a part of themselves. They seen themselves as a part of the sacred circle, as the spear, the sacred circle or the spirit. They seen themselves as one with it. Animism, basically, they were children of the earth. They had it in common. They both were herbalists, matriarchal, matrilineal. They both beat the drum. They live very similar. They live off the land. So these two allied to fight against the Europeans, the colonial invaders that was here. But of course, the East Coast was ground zero. They loved the beaches when they came here. They didn't want the swamps, but later they said, oh yeah, we'll take the swamps too. So they pushed us further and further and further back. And then in the 1800s, the Gunsa was the last stand against the westward expansion. Crossing over the great Mississippi, going on out west, chasing that great American dream, taking all the land because they found oil out there on the so-called Indian land. So Tecumseh tried to stop that. He was the last stand. He tried to unite natives. He told all the natives, he said, you have so much in common. Let us unite and not fight. You're not my enemy. We may have fought in the past, but you're not my enemy now. We both share a common enemy. And it is this man who is from across the water who come here to take our land and push us off and kill us and enslave us. That was his message. But eventually he failed too. It was just too many of them. It was too many of them united against us who was not united. Now you fast forward hundreds of years into the future. Here it is, it's 2018, going on 2019, and lo and behold, as sure as I'm walking on pavement, natives still not together, still divided, still fighting with each other over race, something that you didn't start, something that they started. They started this crap so they can divide you and take the land. If you're too busy fighting each other because, oh, you don't look like an Indian, what the hell does an Indian look like today? My family, we accepted people into our bloodlines, and it all wasn't voluntarily. So my grandmothers was raped by white men. So as a result, they have that gene in them. Some of us did it out of love, because you can't control who you love, and all of them weren't bad, because a lot of them helped us. Some Europeans, some colonials, just like with the underground, some colonial people who they call sympathizers helped with our cause because they didn't like what their own people was doing. Those kind of people, some of them married into our family too. So that gene is there. But as I tell some of my people, just because an Irish, English, French, Spanish person marries into my family, that does not make me them. That makes them one of me. We're the people, our land. So if they integrate into our family, they become what we are. We don't become them just because they married in. Now, this is what the colonial people want you to believe. They want you to believe when they married in, you become whatever they are. It's common sense. When they marry into your family, they become what your family is. They teach you that a drop of black blood doesn't make you a native. Who made that rule up? One of the Indian police? Isn't his last name is Dawes, from the Dawes Rolls, who the Bureau of Indian Affairs love to cite? If you're not on that, you're not an Indian. Man, look, if you are so assimilated that when somebody asks, when you are speaking about your native culture and lineage, heritage, whatever, if you are so assimilated that whenever you're speaking about who you are, what nation you belong to, and you got to say, I am a full-blood, recognized, enrolled, so on, so on. You got to give all those descriptions to legitimize your Indianness, then you're assimilated. Who are you trying to impress or prove to, or show that you're in the in crowd and others aren't? Because you are a federally recognized tribe does not make you a Native American or American Indian. Well, let's rewind. The Bureau of Indian Affairs was created for American Indians. Anybody born here can be a Native American. As a matter of fact, that's what the Irish called themselves, Native Americans. Anybody can't be an Aboriginal. Anybody can't. And when you're speaking about being Aboriginal, you're really speaking about being pre-colonial. There's a lot of tribes here that are colonial era tribes, and then you have nations who were pre-colonial that existed before the time of Columbus, before the time of any of the Europeans when they came here. They were already here functioning. The Iroquois already had a government who the United States modeled themselves after. Except they had to change it from matrilineal to patrilineal because they couldn't have women running things, which you see the shape we're in today. You got the patrilineal people grabbing crotches, but that's another story. We're talking about people like the Gunsa, who wanted to unite indigenous people. But today, indigenous people are more concerned with colonial values and perpetuating our own genocide by trying to determine on who's a native and who's not. You know, there's three things to consider when speaking about blood quantum: dogs, horses, and Indians. Those are the only three that have to show your blood, your pedigree. So we've been reduced to an animal. And those of you who continue to perpetuate this, you're perpetuating our own genocide, and you're worse than they are. If this is the stance that you're taking, by belittling and cutting out your other brothers and sisters across this land, you're worse than they are. George Washington and all of the founding fathers, those are your fathers, because you're perpetuating what they taught. You're perpetuating Walter Plecker. You're perpetuating Darwinism. You're perpetuating our own genocide. You're perpetuating it. You're worse than they are. I can understand that coming from them. They feel they have the right through manifest destiny and the doctrine of discovery. What's your excuse? That's theirs. You're supposed to be a steward of the land. You're supposed to be in the circle, the sacred circle. How did you become so much like them and love being like that? You love being like them. How did you become like that? Why do you perpetuate it? Why do you love it so much?
I do not identify as an American.
Not an American. This voice stopped us in our tracks this week as we were debating labels and politics and race and faith in this country. And that's John Garhio Kane. He's a Native activist and radio host and member of the Mohawk tribe.
I'm Mohawk, but that's not even our word. That's a word that is placed on us. I'm the Mohawk word, and I know this sounds strange, but the Mohawk word for Mohawk is Gunyagahaga.
John heard our coverage of this changing American identity and reached out to us to say, hey, I don't fall under this big American umbrella.
The reason I reached out to the program is because there are Native people, and I'm among them, who don't identify ourselves as Americans. We still maintain that we are Native, that we are Mohawks, Oneidas, Senecas. And this can go, across what we call Turtle Island, that many of us identify ourselves as our original peoples. And we reject the notion of being forced into this American mosaic because it is our distinction and our autonomy and our sovereignty that we assert and that we promote and that we look to carry into the future.
573 federally recognized tribes in the United States. But as a Mohawk, John doesn't seek federal recognition. While he lives on Native territory in upstate New York, John says he does not live on American soil and he does not feel American.
For Native people, we rarely have the opportunity to identify ourselves because we've been so misidentified and redefined by everybody from Hollywood to government to even the use of mascots. And I oftentimes talk about the unique racism that Native people experience, not suggesting that it's worse than any other form of racism, but it certainly is unique because of the history and because of who we assert that we are, not just a people looking for equality within the American system, but that distinction and that autonomy.
And it's interesting. I wonder if, we're seeing a resurgence, obviously, or maybe not a resurgence, but an emergence in some cases of new labels and new forms of identifying. And often for communities of color in this country, a lot of that is trying to cut through the sort of colonialist, ideas of assimilation and get right to the core of who we really are. Are you seeing this resurgence among younger Natives, where there's this sort of awareness that maybe wasn't there before, a connectedness to not so much to the United States of America, but to these sovereign ideals?
Well, part of it is really born out of the struggle for identity. And I think there is such confusion amongst Native people because of the history and because of so many oppressive policies that the United States has had over the years, including the one that they call assimilation, because it still stripped away who we are. I mean, everything from the residential schools where the policy was kill the Indian, save the man. So the idea of, cutting off the hair, or forbidding the language, putting Native kids in uniform and trying to condition them to rid themselves of that primitiveness as it was labeled, and to strip that away. So what we have now, it's been building since the 70s. What you have now are people, young people in particular, like you suggest, that are clearly confused about who they are. And do they have to be Americans because somebody said so? I mean, if you look at, the legal basis for that, in 1924, the United States passes the Indian Citizenship Act, where they simply declare that all Native people are citizens. By the time you come out of World War II, it is clearly established that the idea of a nation trying to denationalize a population and impose their nationalized views on them is considered a war crime. Yet there you have this act of Congress in 1924 saying that all Native people are hereby U.S. citizens, even if we're not asking them to be. And I think many young people are becoming more and more aware of this. And part of it is the internet, the access to information. There's a lot more books being written and that kind of thing. But there's also a lot more conversation about the gaps in what we were taught as kids in the American public schools. And it's not just about making us angry about that history, but saying, wait a second, our history isn't the same as everybody else's history. So if our history is different, what does that mean about our present and what does that mean about our future?
And I want to talk about that a little. Native communities are often some of the least covered in the media and some of the least talked about when it comes to issues of identity and many of these other issues. Has the history, has this exploitation, has this lack of attention, if you will, and other forms of oppression shaped different Native communities and almost reinforced this idea of becoming independent and independent entities?
Well, absolutely. I mean, the whole idea of our identity has already been so manipulated by the outside. And of course, what is our relationship, with the state and the federal government? And this is the challenge that we often have. We are still being pushed into complying with state laws, even on our own territories, and even with Andrew Cuomo, we're in a constant battle with this notion of native to native trade, suggesting that somehow we have to comply with state laws when there's no basis in law to suggest that. And we, as Native people, we can't travel internationally unless we get a U.S. passport. I mean, you go back to 2010, the Iroquois Nationals lacrosse team, which had traveled on Haudenosaunee passports, were denied the opportunity to go play at the World Games in Manchester, England, because the United States and Great Britain were indifferent about the use of Haudenosaunee passports. So the Iroquois Nationals didn't get to play in the World Games of lacrosse, which is kind of absurd all by itself. But so this whole notion that in spite of the fact that there is an international standard established by the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the United States still stands in stark violation of almost all of the articles of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And in fact, you could argue that there's not a judge or a politician in the United States that will place enough priority on an international standard to say, well, maybe we need to rethink what that relationship is and how we go forward. So as more information and we are able to research our own histories a little bit, we've reclaimed much of what was stripped away by programs, by Hollywood, by the media, even by the use of mascots and that kind of thing. When I was a kid growing up, there were a lot of Native kids who said, they'd root for the Washington Redskins because there was nothing else.
I want to get to that point, though, right?
Okay.
There are kids that said they would root for the Redskins. I'm sure there are Natives people who will disagree with you, who will say, hey, I am an American and I identify with the tribe, and those things can coexist.
Well, they can and they do. But when you put that question to somebody and you ask, are you an American or are you Navajo or are you Mohawk or are you Oneida or are you Seneca? All of a sudden they think, well, if there's a choice to be made, and then where do you prioritize? So is your identity really Seneca or is it really American? That question invites more questions. And those are the questions that rarely are we allowed to ask. I mean, everything from, a Native kid being, somewhat compelled to pledge allegiance to the, to the flag or sing the national anthem, that kind of thing. This is still something that when a Native kid doesn't do that, they are still met with a lot of pressure, to follow suit and to conform.
And why is it, in your opinion, so important for a sovereign identity to be preserved?
Because we fade away otherwise. I mean, assimilation is still genocide. If you look at the definition of genocide, the idea of making a people, disappear. And if you try to assimilate us or try to subjugate us or absorb us into the United States, then the question is, do we still exist?